Can I ask a question of Hull, just quickly?
Of course.
Which is, why do climate skeptics always advocate geoengineering, as you found?
In the experiments themselves.
But in real life, does anybody know the answer to that? I just don't understand that position.
They don't believe in climate change.
But they think geoengineering is great. It's like I don't understand how you can follow that. It's just you see it in the popular press all the time. People rubbishing global warming and then saying, but actually, this geoengineering would create jobs. Looks kind of interesting. It's a bit of a challenge.
If you have it, you don't have to stop driving. Yes.
Who's marshalling the questions?
But that does require you to believe in climate change.
Okay, well,
Sorry.
I don't know whether there's an answer.
I don't know if there is an answer. I just wondered if you
at
thought
the moment.
I think it's about the personal implications of accepting global warming and the economic implications of it in terms of the costs of mitigation. So if you look at the Global Warming Policy Foundation and Nigel Lawson being an arch skeptic, if you listen to how his rhetoric has changed from being that he doesn't believe the science, he doesn't believe the scientific basis of global warming, to actually gradually shifting to saying, actually, I'm not going to dispute the science so much, but I don't like the medicine that's going to actually dish out to deal with it. And so he's now beginning to argue about the economic implications of global warming rather than global warming itself. So this is where this is a dilemma. So if you accept global warming and you accept climate change mitigation, which is about going to low carbon, low energy futures, that has implications for every one of us in terms of how we live, what it costs us to do different things, etc., etc. People don't like that. Geoengineering is a much more remote thing that will not necessarily have an impact on you personally and how you live as characters. What I wanted to ask was really about, I'm with Matt that I don't like geoengineering because I worry about the fact that we haven't done due diligence on the science of it. So if we consider the carbon dioxide problem as effectively being geoengineering, in a sense that's what we've been doing, we've been geoengineering the planet, perhaps in a very uninformed and naive way, and we're still trying to understand the consequences from a very, very simple forcing agent, much more simple than any of the SRM things, I think, on balance.
No, I
because
agree.
it's globally uniform, it's not season dependent like any of the SRM. And we still don't understand the implications of the climate system on a very simple bit of geoengineering, I would argue. And therefore, I wondered if those involved in the fifth assessment report would like to comment on how geoengineering is entering that, because actually I think that is what needs to happen. We need to elevate it to the level of scientific due diligence that we've given carbon dioxide problem ever since IPCC started. That's what it requires, and the more we as scientists push for that due diligence to be done and to prove one way or the other that it's safe or not safe, as we had to do with the CO2 problem to show that it is real and that it is potentially dangerous, then until that's done, I think it's very hard to really support any of the methods that are out there.
The main problem that you've got with this is that everything that you report in IPCC has to be based on the peer-reviewed literature. Now that is absolutely fine, because that means that everything has to be to a well agreed, if you like, and well documented degree of scientific integrity, if you like. Now,
That's what this problem requires too.
this does require it, but the problem is at the moment is that the research, I can say we've done some geomet kind of simulations, I can say we've done some work for SPICE, but we're miles away from encompassing this with multi-model ensembles, with the complexity that's necessary for any of the solar radiation management issues at the moment. I think that's our main problem. We're going to be able to get a subset of this into the IPCC, but it'll only be a small bit. Having reviewed the chapter, there's for working group 1, there's 2 pages or less. But, well, Chris, do you want to comment? You're actually a lead author on this.
Chapters that cover geoengineering. So there's the clouds and aerosols chapter. And Olivier Boucher is a lead author on that. And they will be covering SRM techniques and the physical impact of some of the stuff Jim and Andy have shown. And I'm the lead author for the carbon cycle chapter that will be covering an assessment of CDR techniques and also some of the possible side effects of SRM on the natural carbon cycle. So like Tim's talk and Pete Cox's talk can be relevant to the carbon cycle side. But I would certainly say that possibly the people who are selected as lead authors for those chapters weren't necessarily selected because they have geoengineering expertise. They might be experts in carbon cycle and clouds and aerosols, but the process of writing is such that there are several rounds of expert review. So I'll take this opportunity to encourage everybody, the speakers, everybody in the audience, get involved, read the draft chapters, make sort of review comments, and we can pick up where there are gaps in the assessment of the literature. So Jim said there isn't much in the literature at the moment, but I suspect there's a lot more than is being covered in the existing chapters. That makes sense. Well, it's kind of more of a comment, but I don't know if people want to answer this. But Matt and Jim both made the comment that SRM is riskier, whereas CDR is more benign. Tim's shaking his head. Kind of possibly that might be true from the sort of physical response of the system. But I'd just like to make the point. As soon as you get into the fact that to do CDR on a big scale, it competes with agricultural land and food production. I would very much hesitate to call CDR benign.
I totally support you in that, Chris. Yeah. And so Julia flags up rightly the uncertainties around sunlight reflection, and with carbon removal, we know what the effect of removing the CO2 out of the atmosphere is, but the difficult challenges are all about what I talked about, the future of land use, trying to meet food demand, trying to preserve natural ecosystems. It becomes a much bigger problem than one that's defined by the current space of IPCC, for example. It clearly strays, as several of these things do, beyond their remit, and therefore one might ask what would be the right way to do a good assessment of the potential for carbon dioxide removal, especially should it involve land vegetation.
Just a couple of things. First, on the science, it's true that it's ironic that geoengineering schemes target the more uncertain processes in the climate system, like aerosol indirect effects, which is a very uncertain, global carbon cycle, very model dependent, and stratospheric chemistry is only starting to get integrated in global climate. So that's yes, certainly uncertainties in the science is a main thing. Another thing, maybe more for discussing with the public, is that if we start geoengineering, it will take a very long time to be sure that it's actually doing something. But I mean, it took us like 30 years to realize that to be sure that the world is warming. So it will take about the same amount of time to measure that the world is cooling, or that geoengineering doesn't do harm. So 30 years, is that quite a long time to persuade the public to start putting money in something?
I've thought about that a bit in the realm of carbon dioxide removal as against mitigation, reducing carbon dioxide emissions. I would say in some cases it's easier to quantify and convince external scrutineers that you've removed a given amount of carbon and stored it in a particular form in a particular place than it is to persuade someone that you've eliminated some emissions that you would otherwise have made, because that's trying to establish the absence of something, absence of a hypothetical, rather than measure physical quantity of something you've taken out of the atmosphere. So I don't think it's always obvious that that it's somehow harder or worse. In the case of carbon removal, verification actually might have some plus sides to it. So, of course, it's a separate question from then calculating the effect that a given removal has on the climate, but that is really solid, established science, I would say. We know the various decay time constants for a given additional removal of carbon to the atmosphere. So, in that sense, I think this is why Patrick makes a great point that we really have to disaggregate this down now. Stop talking about, in umbrella terms, about geoengineering. Always be specific. I mean, these carbon removal is a completely different set of science and societal questions to sunlight reflection, and dig down deeper than that and be specific.
It's certainly beyond the political timescale, right? So it's in no party's interest to even really enter the debate, because they can't do anything that's going to have a physical effect in the lifetime of a parliament, or even 2 or 3 parliaments. So why should they bother? I guess anything to public opinion, whether they can be seen to be acting. But then you have you do actually mention some of your papers that you separate into human timescales and political timescales for points, and say things. If you start to talk to people and say, well, it's in your lifetime, or it's in your grandchildren's lifetime, so you're acting now to preserve their future or something, then people do relate to it.
We tried that with reducing the carbon emissions, and it's not been really.
The problem with that is that asks people to actually change their behaviour in a way that's very costly. And this is this problem that is made. Basically, it's this idea of cognitive dissonance, is that we would rather disbelieve facts than change our behaviour in a way that we don't like. Right? So this is why we tend to ignore things that we don't like. We just don't see it, or we change our world view to fit what we actually want to do anyway. This is why you don't want to stop driving your car, so it's very convenient not to believe in climate change, or maybe to believe in it but then say you're doing geoengineering. It's quite hard looking into psychology, because some people say more about it than I can.
It's sort of quite a lot of critique in reducing this down to whether an individual will change their behaviour or not.
Yeah.
A lot of those issues are structured by the decisions about where we live and where we work and how we transport things around. And those effectively remove a lot of the choice elements to what individuals can do, at least to some degree. So people are careful about reducing it down to whatever excuse they do. The other thing about the question you mentioned is, will the public support it over that long time period? And again, I think we have to be more specific on that. Who are we talking about, for what, where?
Yeah.
It's just too vague a notion for the public. It's far too vague.
There are many of them.
For a useful concept. So if we're talking about particular mechanisms in particular locations, that's trials, then at least we've got something to work on. Otherwise, what are we talking about? Global population?
Oddly, the local population for the spice trial we talked to, they were completely comfortable with it. Actually, oddly enough, that
with the trial or comfortable with large scale change of the climate system?
yeah, I don't know what the answer to the second question is. It is 2 different things, but it boiled down to the fact that the place that we were planning to do it was a disused airfield. But it was a disused airfield that the American Air Force occasionally, actually more than occasionally, relatively regularly, tried nighttime low-level parachute drops.
Yeah.
And so their entire framing was, is this experiment going to stop those idiots in Hercules coming over at 300 feet at 3 a.m. in the morning? So it's really difficult. It's a really difficult problem. It's a multi-scale, hyper-disciplinary problem. Almost impenetrable.
Let's just take another question just to...
Brief comment in relation to technical assessments, and we don't know at this stage, obviously, what is going to be in the IPCC 5th assessment report, but there are, in fact, being discussed as we're sitting here, well, probably not yet, but in Montreal, 3 technical documents to the CBD's own technical committee. I'm not would pretend that those are in any way comprehensive or perfect documents, but I think they are part of the mix that would probably get lost in CVD's papers unless they're deemed to be more useful and can be better communicated. So it's worth looking at those technical documents underlying it. But a question to Hal, if I may, was the assumption that if you were spending on emissions reduction, that unless you spent precisely enough, that you would get no benefit? Or was there was the assumption that unless you spent $120, you got nothing at all? And if that's the case, then isn't that skewing what would happen in practice, where there's always going to be some benefit, even if you don't hit your degree target?
Absolutely. So that's the way the game was set up. We didn't invent that. That's how it was. It's been previously played and published, and we thought we'd like to start from there on the grounds that then you can link to all that literature and say, you know, we can sort of draw it rather than putting the whole thing in isolation. You can say, well, these findings are also known. However, it's clearly the case that that's not a realistic way, not a realistic model of how climate change and emissions reduction works in practice. So, you know, but you're always trading off in these games the complexity of reality versus a game that is not only simple enough to write down and get meaningful data from, but also simple enough to explain to somebody who's going to sit down for, you know, they've got 5 minutes to read a piece of paper and then play. So it's got to be something that is understandable, and you have to make these sweeping and largely incorrect simplifications to it. So certainly you're right, your understanding is correct, but no, it doesn't really reflect reality. So I think it's better to think of the game we play as not emissions reduction versus geoengineering, as one sort of a solution versus another solution, and sort of drop those labels altogether. Just to say there are different ways in which you can try this problem, some of which have different timescales and different features.
So it seems at the moment the funding councils are asking that there be a social scientist to tell us what social science will say. I don't know how scientists operate. Certainly within my own field, ethics, there's massive disagreements, and if that's the model you take, you will end up with one particular point of view, which is what's happened when it comes to addressing mitigation. Where I think we need to be moving is something more like an IPCC type setup that takes into account the various views from humanities and social science. I don't know how we can get there, but I am worried about this idea that if you just get a social scientist, they'll tell you what the social scientists all agree, because we don't need to talk about.
Well, I can comment because I'm doing now a review of sustainability research at this university and with its partners. So it's kind of my job to think about where's the current thinking about how do we do sustainability research in a way that plays to our strengths and really is world class. And so I've been busy reading the literature on where the current thinking is in terms of what I hinted at earlier, this idea of a transdisciplinary research, it's being called now, where you have an interdisciplinary strand where science as an epistemology is still king, but there's also an action-oriented, which Matt calls something different, but basically options appraisal research, where you actually bring the publics on board early and you allow other knowledge systems in. I'd like for, speaking out loud on current thinking, I think as an forget what the Research Council's doing, etc., because they're way behind the times, I think, at the moment. But as an institution, we could be bold and we could embrace that. And I'm very conscious that the way to do this properly is not to. At the moment, I think people broadly from either the social sciences, arts, and humanities often feel like they're in a service role to some questions driven by science. And I think the absolute crux, if we got it right in Exeter, is we could put up, say, 3 grand challenges we want to collectively address, and it should be clear that maybe for none of them, and certainly not for all of them, should it be obviously a purely science-led question. I think that's perhaps weirdly at the crux of this, that at the moment it's all wrong. It's still some perceived as and driven by top-down science questions, and no social scientist or arts or humanities person worth their salt, I think, would be willing to just act in a service role to a science-driven agenda, when what's happening internationally is all the international global research programs are busy banging their heads together, coming up with something called, Future Earth, I think is the document, And it is saying from all the scientists primarily that they've surveyed that, oh yes, after all, people have caused the problem, we're kind of going to have to be the solution if there is a solution. So yeah, maybe social science kind of is at the core of this, and the arts and humanities. I mean, it's so, when you say it like that, it seems like, duh, of course that's the case. But finally, even the science community has come to that conclusion. And then it's a question for me institutionally, okay, how do we act on that? How do we do, can we do something world class, taking that as our start point? And then we have to wait for the research councils, funding bodies, etc. to catch up. But there's a great report by Rescue, which is a European research foundation or fund coordinated thing. The Rescue report, it's about these, basically about these resilience options for future Earth. Jill Yeager, I think, chaired it. Really worth reading if you're, for my favourite reading so far on this topic, because it really lays out how to do this properly, I think.
I think it helps to have something that's actually concrete to work on together. Because there's also this sort of event where you come and you talk for a bit and then you all go back to your departments. Whereas you actually have a project that is multidisciplinary, and this I'm going to bang my own drum, right? So I think this game idea, right, it's everybody looks at it and says, I can see something wrong with that, right? Which is great, because although it sounds bad, it's actually really good. It means everybody can come and say, I can improve that, or I can make it better, and it's a meaningful vehicle for communication. It forces you to articulate exactly what it is you're trying to say in a way that can get written down formally and used in the game. It's quantitative and qualitative. But I think the other thing is to bang another drum is the G360, which is we always intended to have this sort of forum whereby there would be a lot of repeated interactions so that people didn't just talk to the same social scientists that they happened to know and worked with on their last grant, but actually met new ones and became more of a community rather than just a series of sort of pairwise interactions, which is what I think we have now.
I'd just also like to say thank you very much for coming and showing your interest and support for this this workshop. I think it has been very interesting, but I hope it's sort of opened your eyes that we are taking things on a more transdisciplinary kind of basis, that we're certainly opening our eyes to the transdisciplinary nature of geoengineering research. So thanks everyone very much for coming, and we'll keep you informed of what happens next. Look at the website and we'll try and put some of these highlights from the talks up and from the film. Okay, so thank you.